I'm Deeksha Pande. I'm an associate fellow at Swaniti Global, and for the past 1 year, I've been focusing on economic diversification and just transition in coal districts. And in that context, the agenda for today's presentation is threefold. So first, we will try to understand what just transition is in global and in Indian context. Then we'll delve a little deeper into what our study has been in Jharkhand and Telangana. And then we'll tell you about the key findings from the study and the larger economic diversification pathways. So first off, I want to start off by telling why we're talking about just transition, or what is just energy transition. Essentially, when like the mine picture that you just saw before the presentation, that was a massive mine in Mancherial, the RK1 mine, I think. So what happens is when the mine closes and we're transitioning away from that resource, what will happen to the millions of workers, communities, businesses that are dependent on on that mine or that fossil fuel, the coal? So that is the essence or crux of just transition. What next for these communities? So just transition has picked up globally, and so much so that there are governments that have formed committees, declarations, commissions on JT. So for example, the Solidarity Declaration of Silesia, which is a coal district in Poland. So what they said was that just transition is a very important topic and cannot, it cannot be taken for granted. And they came up with this declaration so that there are decent jobs for people when the transition happens. Similarly, there's a task force for Canadian coal power workers obviously in Canada. And there's also a Just Transition Commission interim report of Scotland, which came out in 2018, which again focused on government policies in the context of just transition. Now, for India, it becomes very essential to focus on just transition, majorly because they've set the net zero goal of 2070. So again, it is crucial for a well-planned transition so that we can help those communities that are dependent on that fossil fuel to sort of diversify and get decent jobs. And states like Telangana, which is like the first state to plan for a net zero in 2047, which is like 23 years before the national target. So it becomes even more important for this state to plan for a just transition because we have districts in Telangana that are heavily dependent on coal. Now, India's just transition journey is only 3-4 years old, and it has happened in sort of steps, and it has picked up progressively. So the first stage was research, where civil society, academia, think tanks were trying to understand what just transition is. Then the second stage was, along with research, they focused on engagement. So they spoke to stakeholders like coal communities, locals, trade unions, government officials around this topic. Then the third was institutionalization, which is basically the government trying to formulate policies, commissions on just transition. So, for example, in November 2022, Jharkhand, which is again a very heavy coal state, formed the Just Transition Task Force. Then again, we had, I think in June 2022, the Ministry of Coal had formed a Just Transition Division, and now we saw Telangana has, announced a net zero goal of 2047, which will eventually be linked to Just Transition. Now, why are we focusing on Just Transition, and what is the silver lining in this whole, scheme of things? And that is economic diversification. So when the fossil fuel is phased down, what will happen to the coal communities? Now, the only silver bullet here is economic diversification, meaning that you have other sectors that take place of that coal sector and provide that employment opportunities and livelihood opportunities for these workers, for these communities. If not, there'll be ghost towns like the ones that you see in the pictures. These are ghost towns in Fightwell, USA. So not a single person in sight. These are banks, infrastructure just stranded like that. Now, what we did was we tried to understand economic diversification at the ground level, which I think I missed out. After institutionalization is pilots and programs. So this is our pilot that we tried to do. We tried to understand economic diversification in two states and 4 districts, in Telangana, Mancherial and Peddapalli, and Jharkhand, Bokaro and Ramgarh. Now, in this context, we asked 3 very simple questions, which were, what is the scale and type of coal dependency? How would regions diversify? And what are the pathways for diversification? I'll explain this more in detail in the coming slides. So what we essentially did was we conducted primary household surveys and enterprise surveys. So like you see, there was a massive household survey of 1,800 households in Jharkhand, 600 households in Telangana. Additionally, we did focus group discussions, semi-structured interviews, the qualitative stuff to understand coal dependency and diversification aspirations of these districts. Now, this enterprise survey is first of its kind, never been done in coal districts. We went to local enterprises who are dependent on coal and asked them, what sort of dependency they have, what are their aspirations for diversification, what will happen when the phase down happens, and again, what are their aspirations for future livelihoods. And then it was a proper, modeling exercise. We applied robust sampling and all that. Now, the key takeaways we have, again, the surveys were massive. We have a lot of results from the survey, but I'll just take a few moments and explain just a few. So first, we, again, like the first question was coal dependency. So we tried to understand coal dependency across the districts. So just for example, we saw, again, in all 4 districts, coal is central to livelihood, infrastructure, fiscal dependency in all these districts. So, for example, in Peddapalli, we found that 26% of the households are dependent on coal jobs, 15% of households provide services to the coal mines. Again, 26% of registered enterprises are dependent on coal. And again, there are infrastructure dependencies on water, electricity, and coal-based boilers. Similarly, again, a very similar picture for Mancherial. 5% registered are dependent on coal mining, households, infrastructure, again, fiscal dependencies. And again, Jharkhand, which was, the study was done with the help of DEF, also found the same sort of dependency. But here you can see the numbers are a bit higher because again, coal is much more central in Jharkhand than it is in Telangana. So 72% of our registered units were dependent on coal, 48 unregistered or informal enterprises were dependent on coal. 52% of the households still use coal as a primary fuel for cooking, and 22% avail Coal India services for electricity and water. And fiscal dependency was very huge because 10.46 billion rupees in Bokaro, 11.95 billion in Ramgarh was accrued from coal to DMF. Now we've understood what is coal dependency through these surveys. Now we try to understand the diversification aspirations. So again, just for example's sake, I've put these I've taken Peddapalli. So you can see. Again, industry and household aspirations. 36% of the households still prefer their children to work in the coal sector. 44% express their preference for starting their own business in case of a coal phase down. Then you have industry aspirations. 9% of the enterprises are considering diversifying into non-coal sectors, and so on and so forth. Again, similar thing for Ramgarh, but here in Jharkhand, what we did was we tried to understand the digital aspect also. What can the digital medium do, or how can it help increase the employment potential? So yeah, the second point, 65% of the respondents, the household respondents, feel that digital medium is a potential means for employment. Yeah, I mean, this was the major finding in households in Ramgarh. Now, we also sort of understood, that was sort of the aim also, we tried to understand what support they would require for diversification. So we sort of had like these 4 heads, which was institutional, infrastructure, labor, and finance. And within each head, in households, in enterprises, we tried to understand that, okay, if you want to diversify, what support do you need? And it was a bit difficult because they weren't, first of all, sure that they want to diversify, forget thinking about any support. But upon asking these questions, they sort of told us that for institutional support, they would, they want more permission for starting new industries and better law and order condition. Now, this is very tricky because in every district we went, they just wanted better law and order condition. So that was very, universal. Then for infrastructure, they wanted access to more interior parts of the district where they don't have access to, especially the enterprises. Again, they wanted cheap and reliable electricity and internet connection. Labor was very interesting because in all these districts that you go, you see that people are trained for only one sort of skill. So, and they want to diversify, but they don't have those skills, or they don't know what sort of skills they require. So a lot of them said that opening training centers would be very helpful in sort of diversifying their skill sets also. And also education was again, universal concern for a lot of these workers and households. For finances, very easily, they wanted cheaper finances and easy documentation for, sort of diversifying into new businesses. Now, we've understood the coal dependency, the diversification aspirations. Now, we want to focus on what the pathways for diversification will be. So, what we essentially did was, after having done all these studies, all these surveys, we tried to come up with sectors that can be sort of opened in these districts and that can, sort of help diversify the district. So what we did was, how we identified these sectors was based on household aspirations, industry aspirations, what are the existing policies for that particular sector, and what is the natural potential of that district. So for example, if a district is also, is very heavy on agro resources, so that could be one sector for diversification apart from from the coal sector. And once we get these sectors, what we did was we tried to align these sectors with the pathway. So we sort of underscored the comparative advantage of that sector. We tried to understand what are the opportunities in that sector, weaknesses, and the government support. So, for example, just 2 minutes. So this is a very broad, sectoral classification that we had for Telangana. So for Pedapalli, we had these many sectors. Mancherial, again, these sectors. Common sectors were solar manufacturing, textiles, and food processing. So in just 1 minute, I'll try to tell you how we developed that pathway. So for example, food processing. Now, the comparative advantage is, you can see that both these districts are endowed with, good agricultural resources. There's optimum conditions for all these resources. And there's strong network of railway and road transportation, which becomes a comparative advantage for that sector in these particular districts. Again, challenges would include poor processing facilities. There's no investment in this sector, in these districts, and there's lack of supply chain, which is like there's no value chain attached to these sectors. And opportunities, again, is that, if food processing sector comes up big in these districts, it will eventually increase farmers' income and promote livelihood and local entrepreneurship. Again, we have policy alignment also for this sector, because there's already a Telangana food processing policy of 2024, which gives special food processing zones. Then there's capital investment also, grants and subsidies. Then we have a scheme for formalization of micro food processing units, which sort of creates cooperative societies, FPOs. It sort of brands also and markets the product. And again, we have state support for the sector, because there are Raitu Vedikas that help in crop management, improve facilities. Then we have the massive Mission Kakatiya, which gives, irrigation infrastructure, 24/7 free power, so on and so forth. So this is just for one sector. Like this, we've done this for several sectors in each of the 4 districts that we've surveyed, and we hope that these sectors will also match up to the coal sector, but that's just a dream. So I would just want to leave you guys with one thought, that when the transition happens, when coal phases down, which is again 20, 30, 40 years from now on, the communities, workers, businesses will be under the pangs of a massive transition. It's it's a long road, but the planning needs to start now, and dialogues need to, we need to do more dialogues like these for such planning.